A new piece in The Atlantic takes readers behind the scenes of Donald Trump's re-election campaign. Staff writer Tim Alberta spoke with campaign co-managers Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles at different points over the past 2 months. It details those discussions in a new piece titled "Trump is Planning for a Landslide Win." Tim joins us now. Tim, good morning. It's good to see you. So you, as usual, did a deep dive here, spent about 6 months talking to the people running the campaign. You now say they are preparing for a landslide win. Why do you say that?
Hey, good morning, Willie. Thanks for having me. You know, what's really interesting is that from the opening moments of my opening conversations with Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles, it became really clear that their confidence about this race was rooted in Joe Biden, not in Donald Trump. In other words, they had begun to conceptualize a campaign here that was really built around running a very specific race against a very specific opponent in Joe Biden. And what they've done over these past 6 months or so is really try to optimize the campaign against Joe Biden. Everything they've done in terms of messaging, everything that they've done in terms of budgeting, all of their targeting of voters, all of the internet memes they're creating, everything that they are doing as a campaign has really been built around not beating a generic Democrat, but beating Biden and attacking his very particular vulnerabilities. And so when you suddenly, in these last couple of weeks, have a realization inside the Trump campaign that Biden could be getting out, whether it's Kamala Harris or anyone else replacing him at the top of the ticket, it has sent a chill through the Trump campaign because they recognize that their own candidate is deeply flawed and deeply unpopular, but they felt as though they had basically boxed Biden in and were in a position where they were getting ready to run the table across the battleground states and win a very, very solid and maybe even sort of resounding victory in the Electoral College because they didn't think that Joe Biden would be able to recover from the position that he was in.
You know, we've seen in recent days former President Trump attacking Vice President Harris, perhaps anticipating that if there is a change, she would be at the top of the ticket. He projects confidence about a race against her, but are they actually as confident as they sound about the potential for running against Kamala Harris?
You know, I'm not sure that they are, Willie. They told me, Trump's campaign managers said, look, you know, any Democrat who replaces Biden at the top of the ticket is going to inherit his baggage. We're going to attack all the same weaknesses. That person is going to have all the same vulnerabilities. But again, I would just stress that so much of what they've built this campaign around is basically a machine to contrast the visuals of sort of Trump's, you know, virility and machismo, and he can do press conferences or he can do rallies for an hour and a half, and versus Biden and his debate performance, all of the sort of viral memes that they're creating, all of the mailers that they're doing, the television spots that they've already begun to conceptualize, they're all going to be focused on Biden's age and his capacities. They can't do that with Kamala Harris. It's a very different situation. And they also recognize that some of the targeting of voters that they have been planning would have to necessarily change if Kamala Harris were at the top of the Democratic ticket. So there is just fundamentally sort of a strategic and tactical reset if Biden is not their opponent.
Tim, this is a smart and deeply reported piece. I'm just shocked, frankly, that you got the access, because part of the superpower of these two campaign managers, Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita, is that they don't talk to the press on the record, and they haven't been out there publicly as the face of the campaign. How and why did they give you so much access?
Well, at the risk of giving away any of my secrets, I think I would just say that, once these folks realize that you're going to be able to get to everyone else and talk to everyone else and find out, frankly, the things that they don't want you to find out, then they start to realize it's probably in their best interest to cooperate and participate and try to at least control some piece of the narrative to the extent that they're able. So, I had spent quite a bit of time already sort of tunneling into Trump world and knew a lot of the other people involved and had a pretty good sense of what was going on. And so when I came to them and said, listen, I think it's probably in your best interest just to have these conversations with me yourselves on the level, they ultimately agreed.
Tim, in this piece for The Atlantic, it's an incredible piece of reporting. You write, in part, they would be, talking about Chris and Susie, they would be remembered for running a campaign that altered the nation's political DNA. And you also write that you were struck by their arrogance. Talk about that.
Yeah, look, we've come off consecutive presidential elections. In 2016, Donald Trump wins the presidency by a combined 77,744 votes in 3 states, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. 4 years later, Joe Biden wins the presidency by a combined 42,918 votes across 3 states. And I think we're just expecting, all of us, that this would be yet another cliffhanger here in 2024. But the Trump people from day one have operated under a very different theory. Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles looked at these last 2 Trump campaigns and recognized that they were, in many ways, clown shows. I mean, they were not well managed. They were not well budgeted. There was not sort of a unified theory of how to attack his opponent. These are 2 very, very smart and shrewd political operators, and frankly, they are both cutthroat political operators. These are people who know how to win elections, and what they saw from day one was an opportunity to paint Joe Biden in such a devastating, debilitating light that they would not just be squeaking by in the Electoral College, but that they would be winning comfortably in the Electoral College, and that they would be even winning the popular vote, something Republicans have only done once in the last 8 tries. And what was interesting to see, you guys, is that over the last couple of months, as they saw their plan beginning to really sort of take form and the polls were shifting and it was clear that what they were doing was working, they went from feeling sort of confident about their ability to win big. They suddenly got pretty cocky about it, and they started talking openly, using words like landslide and blowout in some of our conversations.
And those are words that political operatives usually do not use in public. Willie, we should also just note that maybe this time will be different. But in the past, Donald Trump has not reacted well when his aides, when his advisors suddenly get the spotlight, when they get the attention. It's not just that he got furious at Steve Bannon for outshining him. He got angry at his own son-in-law, Jared Kushner, when he's starting to get a lot of media attention. So we'll have to see if there's any blowback here for Chris LaCivita and Susie Wiles.
Yeah, that's a good point. He doesn't like profiles of other people, certainly not people on the cover of magazines other than himself. The new piece is online for The Atlantic. It's titled, Trump is Planning for a Landslide Win. Tim, Alberta, thanks so much as always. We appreciate it.
Hey there, MSNBC fans. I'm Luke Russert, and be sure to join me, Rachel Maddow, Jen Psaki, Lawrence O'Donnell, Steve Kornacki, Joy Reid, and many more September 7th in Brooklyn, MSNBC Live Democracy 2024. Click on the link for ticket information. We will see you there.